We are back and we are still the task force on the implementation of the pupil weighting factors report. And this is the second part of our meeting on December 1st. And what we are going to talk about now, which was not warned on the agenda, I'm sorry, we've got the December 1st letter that we've mentioned before is done by the same folks who are working on all of our analysis. And so this was a very last minute piece of data that Nicole was able to pull together for us. So what we're going to be talking about is continuing that conversation from 2 weeks ago that Catherine took us through around mechanisms for transitions. Do folks remember we had just some bullet points, not a chart, about mechanisms for recalibration. And Nicole is going to take us through really helping us understand the scale of some of the transitions that some districts might need to move through, both in terms of increased and decreased tax capacity in dollars. So Nicole, the floor is yours to take us through the charts. If you could identify yourself for the record, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Representative Conaiza and Senator Hardy and the members of the committee. I'm privileged to present to you today. What I have been asked to do was, this is not a new data. This is the data we look at about 2 weeks ago. And so I was just trying to pull it together and put it into a chart so that the members of the committee could see the impact. And so
before you start, will you remind us of your name and your affiliation?
Yes, my name is Akon Awek and I'm a fiscal analyst at the Joint Fiscal Office. Apologize for that. And so if we go to where the documents are uploaded on the website, you can click on the first one, the estimated change in education spending with ELL grants added. So if you open that document,
not sure which document.
The first one.
If you go to our supporting document section.
Yeah.
Oh, we might need to refresh.
Sending them.
Yeah, refresh, and
Oh, I gotta read.
if you go to the task force,
Give us 1 minute because we loaded it before this was loaded in. So
Oh, yeah.
refresh.
Grants and no ELL weight.
Estimated change in education spending with ELL grants added. Yes, that one?
That's the one. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
All right, good.
So if you open that, that document shows that those are the district, those are ELAID. And what it shows there is estimated change in education spending with ELL grant added. So what we did is we made sure that we included ELL grant so that it can offset the impacts because it is already being granted to those. So that's what we did there.
Is this the one that uses the pupil weights or the one that uses the cost equity?
This is the people's way.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
And so if you put roll down from school to school all the way down, you would see what the impact would be in numbers, in dollars numbers. All the way. Some will go down, some will go up. So that is the impact. Again, based on the constant rate from FY20.
Yeah, just to make sure I fully understand. So this chart is showing by SD the total education spending, assuming that they've received the ELL grants with the numbers that we've been kind of using as our placeholder. And tax rates remain constant. And the weights are from Dr. Colby's October 28th memo.
Column 4. Column 4.
I am with you. That's it. I guess I didn't have a question.
Senator Hardy.
So I'm wondering for all of these, if you have a sort of range, like what is the biggest change into the positive and to the negative? Like what is the range we're talking about? Did you get a chance to do that?
Questions? We'll get back to you on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I think that would be helpful to know sort of how yeah, how big the change is from positive to negative and how much we have to mitigate that change potentially.
And so if you go way down, I present the same information in, if you scroll way down, I present the same information in charts. Just to kind of give you a visual picture of the impact.
And that's the cost equity with ELL grants chart,
This is
No.
still the waiting.
Page
model.
5.
weighting model, oh, just all the way
On
bottom
that,
of the
yeah, there's a
same
chart at the
thing.
bottom.
Thank you, sorry, okay. Oh, that does help with magnitude for me, thank you.
Yes, and again, this is the same information we look at and we kind of factor in ELL granted so that the magnitude of impact is include the ELL as well. So that is what it is in terms of the dollars numbers. Now I have done the percentage here as well. And so based on the way the document, if you go back to the website and you scroll down, up to weighting model with EL grant here in numbers. That is below cost equity rate charts. I cannot, the way they were uploaded this morning.
Yep.
Yeah.
Ah,
If you open that, it also shows the percentage change. And this is like taking the estimated change in spending over the FY 20 spending that also include ELL to kind of see what the change would have been had in the same constant rate.
if I could add a caveat on behalf of Brad, he found some new tiny errors that might or might not have been related to GIS data of some kind that he is going to correct that changed a little bit of this, but that might change a little bit of the magnitude. So just want to, again, everything's a draft, especially since we're talking about the past and not the future. So thank you, sorry.
It's up there, model only based on FY 20 data. And so you could see again, it's school by school district, you could see what the impact would be. You could see positive numbers there and negative numbers there again. That is the same, about the same information we look at the dollars numbers now as a percentage change.
These are in order of county and then alphabetical by county. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, I was,
Correct.
So one thing I'm noticing right off the bat is we've talked about, and I guess this is spending and we're not looking at tax rates yet, but we've talked about sort of what is an allowable change in a single year that doesn't destabilize our school districts, especially like we are not doing this work in a vacuum. We have school districts that are struggling more than they maybe ever have, certainly in, my lifetime. And so whatever we do, we want to be really, really careful that we're not further destabilizing them. And so what is an allowable change in rate within a year that even in either direction that wouldn't destabilize them? We've talked about 5% being a threshold that was built into Act 46 that seemed to work. But I'm noticing that for some of these, and this is spending and not tax rates, but I'm seeing for some of them that might mean that the transition would take 8 years or longer, which is sort of fascinating. Did you, were you able to, are the percentages from the spending comparable to the percentages from the tax rates?
I also work out.
Okay.
next week.
Okay, we can look at that later. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just confused again.
Mhm.
I'm like going around in circles. So this one, the model, the one that we just pulled up that says at the top with ELL categorical grants and no ELL weight, then change in modeled rates versus, so this is the change in the rate. This is not these are not percentages. This is a change in a rate.
The one we're looking right now,
Yeah. So like, if you look at Addison Central, first district, it's 0.015. That is a change, projected change in a tax rate, or is that the projected percentage change in the tax rate?
the table that I'm looking at is in percentages. Is it the same thing?
I think you might have opened up a different. I'm looking at this one.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was looking at the same one as Senator Hardy here.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Colin, Peter.
We have to define what chart we're looking at and what the name is on the index, so we're all sure we're looking at the
The file
correct document.
is the first part. If you go under the very last causing model rates, the file under that, weighting model with ELL grant change in numbers.
In numbers?
Yes.
Same number.
Right, thank you.
Weighting model with EL grants change in spending numbers.
No, spending.
Okay.
And you should see -4.
And the first thing is -4%. And at the top, it says comparison of ELL categorical grant to ELL weight.
You obviously have to work on the titles of these.
Yes. And the towns that don't have anything, those are the towns that don't have anything.
Yeah,
They have no children.
yeah.
Okay, great. I have to ask every time because every time it confuses me and surprises me.
Those are the unorganized towns, of course.
Yes.
Some have kids.
Yeah.
Most of them
Fuel Score has kids. They just don't go to school there.
don't. As is for the other stuff.
Yeah.
I always remember once I get to Somerset, but I didn't get that far this time. Okay.
And this would be an increase in spending. Chair Kornheiser?
Yes.
Did you say that the guide from the other law was 5%?
Yes, but that was a change in tax rate, not spending. You have thoughts, Representative?
No, it's not even a thought. I just want to make sure everybody is aware that these weighting models that we're looking to right now, these are different than the cost equity models.
Yes.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure everybody's aware of what we're looking. These ones don't have the cost equity piece in them.
No, these are the ones we're looking at everything we look at. We're looking at what does it look like with the weights and what does it look like with the cost equity model?
Yeah.
The impacts tend to be in the same direction in the same towns, but they're a little spikier with the cost equity model,
And
which is a very technical term. Senator Hooker.
just for clarification, and this includes the grants. This is ELL as categorical grants,
Yes, not as a weight.
not as a weight. Thank you.
And FRL students are back to the home district.
And like the models we looked at last time, Senator Hooker, these are the funding sits in and the weight sits in the district where the student resides, not where the student attends. Which is true for the models we looked at last time, but not 2 times ago. Are folks ready to look at this from another angle, or do you want more? Okay,
So if we go again, the same info, if we go below that, it would be in chat again. Just give it a visual.
Weighting model with ELL grants percentage change in spending chart?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you are looking at the same information.
And it's using our method of calculating equalized pupils, being additive and not multiplicative.
Yes. This is essentially the current law model with the new weights and the additional weights.
It's like that.
So they're not all
Missing
on there.
things.
No. Wait, I'm confused now because it's not the current law because if it's changing to additive.
We talked, last time I think we talked about discussing the two models, a kind of broad category as current law, kind of, it's kind of more or less following the same process. And the cost equity were kind of differentiating. We had talked about doing that, but if you don't want to do that, it's fine. But this is using the equalized pupil calculation like you've been talking about, additive, FRL at district level, et cetera,
Uh-huh.
and apply it as we're applying under, current law, where, in other words, we're going through the whole process, going through ADM, weighting, equalized pupil tax rate with an ELL grant in there. That's why I'm referring to it as current law. But we can
Oh,
figure
okay,
this out.
but it
Let's just
is
call it the weighting model.
Okay, the weighting model.
Thanks.
This is
it's what we've been calling Brad's model, but it's yours, right?
Yeah.
Okay, the weighting model, okay.
So this is the weighting model that we looked at last week with free and reduced lunch instead of SNAP as a measure of poverty. It's the weight sits with the district where students reside, not where students attend. And we use additive, not multiplicative, to create the equalized pupil numbers. And the weights are from column 4 of Professor Colby's memo from whatever date that was a couple weeks ago that everyone else seems to remember the date of except for me. And that is what we're looking at here. And the reason that we got the new weights from Professor Colby's memo, the 4th column, was because we changed from multiplicative to additive and we changed the way that we measured poverty. And so the weights needed to be recalculated. Okay, are we all back on?
Yeah, I think for future reference, it would just be really helpful to have that like explained in each of the charts, like laid out so we know what we're specifically looking at. Because the titles are confusing.
On this, is this all of the districts, but they're not all labeled?
yes.
Yes.
Okay, so all the data is in the chart, but the labels at the bottom aren't complete. Is that right? So there are more lines than names? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Now, if we transition, okay,
What were you
if
saying?
we transition to looking at rate changes,
Mhm.
which is the column that Senator Hardy was looking at, that would be below that
Weighting model with ELL grant rates in numbers.
in numbers.
Okay.
So
So again, this is if spending stays the same, but all of the other assumptions that I just ran through.
yeah, so that's looking at the new rate. But with respect, this is FY20.
Okay.
Rates. And again, this was what we looked at the last time Brad presented this.
We've looked at this exact chart before, last week.
Yeah. And then I put it in charts just to make it visual.
And this one assumes spending stays the same.
Exactly, yeah. Do you have this one in percentages too? No, okay, okay, that's fine. It's fine. I know it was a very last minute request.
I could actually run if I go back and sit there, I can just go and put it over the FY20 and see what it is.
Okay, I would be curious about that because this idea of a 5%, I'm curious how many years it would take us across. And I imagine that we would be doing it with rates and not with spending. One thing that I notice when I look at this is that I'm seeing this I'm a much more visual math person than a table math person. And so this is really helpful for me. And what I'm noticing is that there's really significant change for a couple spots, but not for the vast majority of them. And I wonder if and I'm absolutely thinking out loud, so forgive me. I wonder if it makes sense to have different interventions for some of the really extreme cases than we might have for other cases. Brad, you are ready with an answer to that question.
Well, I think, and this goes back to what I was saying to you all, and that you, Representative Kornheiser, brought out, is that I did find that some slight things that need to be changed in the background, and that will impact those ones that you're seeing at the extreme. Like
Okay.
Searsburg there's Westfield there. It will impact those.
Okay,
So it will bring them down.
okay,
I can get those numbers to you. I don't know about today, but maybe tonight or tomorrow.
Okay.
Possibly today.
Okay.
But I do recognize that I made the error and so that, it needs to be clarified.
Okay.
That helps.
and for folks, when Brad corrects those, we'll correct these charts and repost them. We'll just actually take down the charts that are here now and repost the corrected charts. Is that legal, Saoirse? Not that you're a lawyer. Is that a thing people do?
Take them down and then repost.
With the correct information? Great, okay. And so that is what we will do. So if people tomorrow or the next day want to go looking for the corrected information, we'll send out an email when it gets corrected. Yeah.
Back to your previous point.
Yes.
Brad, just to make sure, you're talking about mostly small, mostly tuitioning
Yes.
communities. You're not talking about Champlain Valley.
No,
School.
I mean, it will impact Champlain Valley because remember, it's,
Okay,
it's a zero-sum game. But yes, generally speaking, it will impact those smaller tuitioning districts. That's what's going to impact the most.
Yeah. So, there remains and there will remain extreme examples. And so, yeah, I think, Emily, your point is one worth discussing.
So if I imagine just using the 5% rollout method and that we set up the time frame for a rollout based on a percentage that like sort of the maximum can handle, we might be stretching the process out 15 years when the majority of districts only need it stretched out 3 years, which seems like an unnecessarily long intervention if we're doing it just to treat the margins. Yeah.
Well, just first, when we repost these, I really just request we change the title. I can't compare them. I don't know what they are. So they need better titles, but the 5%, and maybe we need Brad in the chair to talk about this because to explain what the 5% was for Act 46 and then.
Wait, let's maybe finish looking through all the charts before we do that. So these are all, Nicole, can you take us through, these are all the ones for the weighting model and then there's another set for cost equity?
For the weighting models, we can, when we're done with this, we can go to cost equity.
Okay. Are folks ready to go through the same charts for cost equity? Okay, great.
Okay, if you go back up, you could see the cost equity with the ELL grant in numbers. And that very much what it come down to. the change in spending was again with ELL grant. Got it.
And this is the same table that we saw. This is just a refresher of a table that we saw a week ago. Okay, 2 weeks ago.
If we say cost equity, we don't really need to say with ELL grants, because that's the whole, that's the whole. You have the cost equity model without an ELL.
You could have the cost equity with ELL as a cost equity payment rather than a grant. Cost equity payments, the way we've been talking about them thus far, are it's totally open dollars that flows to the district separate from their ed spending, rather than a grant like a transportation grant or a special education grant, which is designated for a specific purpose. And the ELL grant is also scaled with that base payment and then the additional payments on top, whereas cost equity, it's the same amount per pupil.
We don't have a percentage for the cost equity. Let's see.
Yeah,
It's okay, I just didn't know if I was missing it.
I have not calculated the percentage yet.
What would, what's the math when under cost equity, or somebody could give it to me more simply, when under cost or under weighting, basically you become as it's a net positive, but under cost equity becomes a net negative.
What's causing that?
Yeah.
Can you say that one more time?
Well, I'm just looking at what, if we were to look at Addison Northwest, and I may just be reading it wrong. They essentially, come out with better tax capacity under weighting, but it's different. It's more of a negative under cost equity.
Do you have an answer?
I would be fair that to Deb.
I can answer that. I can answer that. I mean, the reason is because in the cost equity model, your education spending begins after the grants are given out versus what is under a model, a weighting, which would be it's your entire education spending. And so it's taking away that disconnect that advantages the
Got it.
higher
That's
spending
right. That's right.
districts.
Yep. Got it. Thank you. I just need to have that put back in.
And that's what contributes to the spikiness of
Yep.
this one more than the others.
That's why Champlain Valley does a little bit better under the cost equity because while they do spend a lot of money, their spending per kid is actually kind of on the lower end of the spectrum. So they do a little bit better on the cost equity.
So it narrows that range of challenges that we experience from the weights, about weights being worth more for the high spending district. Anything that you noticed in any of this that you want to share with us?
No.
Okay. Go ahead.
Don't want to say something on there that might be challenged later on. But what I could see again is that if you open the charts below it, is variability of this, of impact. Looking at the picture, I see more going up than down. That's something I see in the chart there. But other than that, I would.
Yeah, and I think that sort of goes to both the the conversation you were just having, the cost equity gets rid of the sort of changes because of high spending versus low spending, but it causes more end result spikiness in the tax rates and spending. So there is still an instability. It's just in a different place.
It adds a layer, and you can be on if you're on the wrong side of both layers, then it's gonna show up. In the case of Champlain Valley, they're on the wrong side of one layer, but they're on the right side of the other layer, so it mitigates their issue.
Are we ready to talk about some of the Act 46 transition mechanisms? Okay, thank you very much, Nicole.
Thank you.
And thank you for busting through to get this to us in the midst of December 1st letter stuff. Thank you. It's you, you're back. And for the informal record, we are talking about Act 46 because it was the most recent time we have significantly messed with education spending. And so it is the most recent example to use of what a transition plan looks like. It is not because there's something particularly Act 46 like about what we are doing right now. It's just that unearthing Act 60 memories is a lot for the brains. So
Yes. So I think the question is really how did the throttle work in terms of Act 46? Act 46, just to very high level do it, give a quick overview for everybody, was the law that encouraged and eventually forced some school districts to merge into large unified union school districts. When they merged into unified union school district, they became one school district, and so therefore the member towns had one tax rate. Whereas before they had a blended tax rate from their elementary school and their union high school. That meant that everybody had a different tax rate. Okay, and when I'm talking about tax rate, I'm talking about equalized tax rates before the common level of adjustment, CLA adjustment. Okay, that's really what I'm talking about here. So we're talking equalized tax rates, the ones that the school districts develop will then go to the member towns. So what happened was there were incentives in Act 46 if they voluntarily merged, and that meant that a school district would come up with a tax rate of say maybe $1.60, and in their first year they could reduce that by 8 cents. The tax rate that went out to their member towns was $1.52. In some cases, I'm making up numbers here, obviously.
thank you.
In some cases, some of the member towns had a very low tax rate relative to that new incentive rate of $1.52, and some had a very high tax rate relative to that $1.52. So the legislature at that point, specifically Ways and Means, I believe it was, recognized that they didn't want people just to go right down to that incentive rate because it would push some people up too fast, which is what they were really looking at, but then they realized it would drop people too. So they're trying to make it so that everybody's still paying for these incentives coming in, which is what they did. So what they did was they said that a town's equalized tax rate from this new incentive rate, the $1.52, could not change by more than plus or minus 5% from the prior year. So if a town had a tax rate of $1.70 in the prior year equalized, and it's now coming to that $1.52, it could only drop, it could drop no more than 5%. So that's 8.5 cents. So its tax rate could only go down 8.5 cents. So instead of $1.52, its tax rate would have been $1.61.5. Okay, we subtract 8.5 from $1.70. On the other side, what is it? I said $1.40, I think, that they can only go up 5%. So that means they can only go up an additional 7 cents. So their tax rate, instead of being $1.52, would have been $1.47.
But spending can still be whatever anyone wants it to be.
Spending was still whatever the school district chose to do. And that's where that initial tax rate of $1.60 came from, less the 8 cents incentive.
Okay.
Okay, to the $1.52. So they've made that spending decision before. This is now going to the taxing side of things where they're raising the money and how the tax rates are being calculated. So that's where the plus minus 5% throttle came in.
Maybe you were just about to explain this, the incentive rates and how they factored it, the, -5 cents minus.
Well, okay, yeah, I kind of glossed over that.
Okay.
That was up at the beginning. So if this new unified union had a tax rate that they calculated to be $1.60, it was their first year of merger, they were allowed to reduce their tax rate by 8 cents. The second year of merger, they could do it by 6 cents, third year by 4 cents, fourth year by 2 cents, then fifth year, it's 0. They're out.
So that was first, and then the
That was
5% came.
So the tax rate reduction, the incentive happens first after they figure out what the tax rate is. So in my fictitious example, I had a tax rate of $1.60. I said it was their first year, so that's an offset. They were able to reduce that $1.60 by 8 cents to $1.52. And so that's the target that the towns were headed towards, that $1.52. And so the first one I said, their prior year tax rate had been $1.70. So that means they can only drop 5%, even though the actual district rate is here, they should be getting, they can't go down that far or that fast. So that's where they got the $1.61.5, less 5%, the $1.70. By the same token, those coming up from $1.40 could only go up another 5% at the most. So that's another 7 cents. Their tax would be $1.47. So they were still underneath this rate. Everybody with me at the moment?
Yep.
Okay, if we keep everything constant for the next year and say all those numbers the same, instead of being $1.60 minus 8 cents, be $1.60 minus 6 cents. So the target rate would now be $1.54 for all the towns. This $1.47, without doing the math in my head, because I'm not sure I do it accurately, would probably be within 5%. So you're talking about another 7.5%. That put them at $1.53 or something like that, roughly. That $1.47, because that was their prior tax rate, remember. So that means they're within that 5% range. Their tax rate would be $1.52, or pardon me, $1.54 in the second year. This other one that was coming down, they were at $1.61. So that's about I guess about an 8 cent and about another 8 cent drop. So that put them down at roughly $1.53. So that would be within that 5% range. Their tax rate would then be $1.54 also. And then regardless of what happens from that point on, once they hit that target tax rate, that's what they got. They got the school district tax rate from then on. So basically the plus minus 5% comes after the incentive was reduced the tax rate. Then towns could not move by more than plus or minus 5%. Once they were within 5% of that new rate, whichever year it happened to be, they always had the tax rate from the school district from then on.
The real rate.
The real rate.
Sorry if you said this earlier. Why 5%? How was that determined?
I don't recall. I think it was just that it seemed like a reasonable number to people. I really do.
I knew that was going to be the answer.
I know. I'm sorry. I don't recall if we sat there and we looked at tax rate changes over time. I mean, we could certainly do that for this. I could go back and look at how tax rates have changed, year to year to year, and see what's happening, kind of what an average rate change is. But I don't recall what the reason. I won't say it was picked out of thin air. I'm sure it was discussed, but I don't remember the discussions.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. It was just what's reasonable.
Seemed reasonable. Okay, that's kind of what I was thinking. But
yeah,
you were there, so thank you.
I've talked to a few people about it sort of in the last week, as I've sort of gotten stuck on this idea that we were talking about a 5-year transition, and that felt arbitrary to me too. And I wanted to be targeted to a scale that was stable. And so I've been asking everyone, sort of consensus on the 5% was that it felt reasonable, and that no one remembers anyone complaining about it being too much or too little. And I asked Sue Siglowski from the School Boards Association to ask around more about what was reasonable as well, so we can get some feedback from school boards about what's reasonable within a range. So, yes, it would be so nice to have it not be that answer that you got for the future.
Yeah, I mean, there are ways you could base it off tax rate changes, statewide average, weighted state as a whole, what's the weighted average, you know, there are all kinds of ways you could do it if you want to do that and look at numbers.
So if we go with, you know, the weighting model and we continue to have equalized pupils, and we did some kind of roll-in of equalized pupils, the 5% would be after the roll-in, basically. So the mitigation of the roll-in might make the 5% less relevant for most districts, not those spiky
Yes,
districts.
yes, you're right. The 5% would come in after the rolling average, because the rolling average is what drives the tax rate.
Yeah,
So the rolling average would happen first to go that route. And then that would mitigate some of the equalized pupil change itself, which in turn would mitigate the tax rate. And then if you had the plus minus 5%, if there were extremes, that would capture them.
Or couldn't we also, couldn't we attempt to project out 5 years and say, how many years of a rolling average would we need in order to roll this in and not have it be a spike more than 5%? So we've been talking about a 5-year rolling average, but that 5 years might mean a 15% change for some districts. And so maybe we should be, you know, or maybe 5% is too long. And so I was thinking about the 5% as a marker for us to actually pick how many years we would be rolling in for.
You're talking about rolling average of tax rate, right? Is that what you're talking about right now?
Well, for weighting, if we use the weighting model, it would be a rolling average of actually equalized pupils.
Right.
Which,
well, I think there's an argument for just doing a rolling average permanently of equalized pupils, because it keeps things more stable. And 5 years may be too long. 3 years is the other. I mean, these are in sort of industry standards. This is what people, you know, school formulas and other formulas use across other instances of, you know, how long do you roll in a new program? 5 years seems like a reasonable amount of time. It's half a decade. And if we keep the rolling average of equalized pupils, there are other things that it helps with too. And 5 years may be too long. After a while, we do a 5-year for a few years and then maybe 3 years, but it mitigates declining enrollment. It mitigates other changes. If we're continuing to tweak these weights constantly, it would mitigate those changes too.
I have a really obvious question related to that. So if we're sort of buffering things with this 5% the way we did with Act 46, or using a rolling average, or both, and education, people are spending whatever people are warning. The sort of non-direct costs of that just get rolled into everyone's tax rates because it's part of general, okay. Right.
Socializing the
Yes,
transition.
I try not to use the word socializing too often, but yes, that is what we would be doing. Okay, great.
Yep. And that's what we did in Act 46. And that's what we did. Spread it out. It was a change for the whole state. So we spread it out amongst the whole state.
Everybody paid for it. Some people
That's right.
had more of an advantage, but everybody paid for it,
Everybody paid for it,
including those who got the advantage.
including those that didn't merge at all for whatever reason. Yeah.
Because that's how the education funding works. That's what the
That's right.
union is doing. It's spreading it out over everyone. I just like to, just in terms of the continual rolling average, just remember that any given year of equalized, we are already averaging ADM in the background 2 years. So which is fine, but I just want everybody.
No, that's a good point. I had forgot that.
So there's already kind of that's supposed to be a smoothie, but if you were to average equalized pupils over, say, a period of 3 years, because you spent 3 years, that would probably obviate the need for any hold harmless provision that's currently in the
Exactly.
It can't drop by X%.
It's cleaner, I think, than having multiple hold harmlesses. Harmless I.
I will tell you that one of the complaints that will happen is that those districts that are growing quickly or seeing a spike in their, not a spike, but an increase in their student counts, they're not going to see that coming through as the longer you make a rolling average. It will certainly benefit those who are losing, which are most districts, but not all districts are losing.
Right.
It's a good
So
point.
that's something to keep in the back of your minds also.
Meaning, having less actual students.
Then you really have.
Yes. So,
But if,
districts that have experienced a lot of folks moving here because of COVID.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Because you've got that cost, but you don't have the student count to support that cost if you're doing much of a rolling average.
But as we're changing this, all the weights, so the equalized pupils are like not real pupils. So some districts are going to have you're right that there are some districts that are actually getting more pupils. Yes, that are actual like real students in the classroom. Yes,
Go to average daily membership.
right,
That's sort of like a real student.
right, exactly. The closest we have in our formula. But yes, so there are some districts that are actually getting more students.
There are.
But there are a lot of districts, if we change the weights, that are going to get more equalized pupils that aren't actually real students. They're just more because they're going to get the benefit of the higher weight.
Right.
So that's the kind of thing that we want to roll in. It is that as districts either really gain or really lose equalized pupils because of the weights, having it come in gradually, so there's not a shock to their system.
I think Senator Perchlik had a question that I skipped a minute ago, so I'm sorry. I just want to add, I think what Brad was pointing out that I think is important is that we don't want to create a system for implementing any change in the weights or cost equity that will cause unintended consequences for actual population changes in the district.
My question, thank you, it was, did we have any mitigation measures for Act 60?
yes.
Yeah.
What were those?
In terms of tax rates, yes. Tax rates changed dramatically when Act 60 started. And it was a two-tier tax rate. I can't remember exactly how it works anymore, but there was a base tax rate, and then there was the so-called sharing pool, which many people, and especially in my town, like to call the shark pool. And you got another piece of your tax rate there, and then the combined. What happened with that was everybody whose tax rate was higher dropped down to where it's below. Everybody who was coming up it was a 3-year. I can't remember exactly how it worked. It was a 3-year roll-in to get to the new tax rate. So it gave people a break coming up, but not a break coming down.
I think Catherine has more she wants to add.
Yes, I just would comment, the lowest tax rate at the time was like 5 cents, and then we were taking everybody basically to $1.10. So that gives you a sense of the scale about how big those changes were. And those were smaller ski towns that didn't have very many kids that had low tax rates, because they have a lot of property value kids. So that gives you a sense about that. There was also a big increase in revenue to help allow that transition.
Wait,
So
Catherine, can you come up here? I see that Senator Hooker is having a hard time hearing you.
You want your,
thank you.
yes.
Catherine Benham from Joint Fiscal, and Act 60, the lowest tax, I'll just repeat what I said, the lowest tax rate was something like 5 cents, and we were taking everybody to $1.10. So that is a big change, and that I was trying to look it up, maybe Source can help me find a document that talks about it, but there was a limit to how much you could go up each year, but it was still a big change. There weren't that many towns that was the most extreme case, but there were a fair number of and it was ski area towns who had lots of property wealth and very few kids generally, who were the ones who were most impacted. And also at the same time, there was an increase in revenues to help with the transition, and therefore that explains why you were able to bring sort of the top end down quickly and phase in the bottom. You weren't trying to have it still be the same pool. You had a new influx of money that you can use for the transition, as well as the whole funding system.
Was that,
Could do right now.
Yes, and finally, let me just say one last thing. These towns were smaller towns, so even in the scheme of spending, it is a small, it mattered a lot to them, but in the scheme of the whole state, it wasn't as dramatic as hitting when you start hitting bigger school districts, it has a bigger impact as well.
and was that increase in funding revenue from just the other towns that went up a little bit to $1.10, or what other?
No, it was a sales.
There were a lot of taxes that came into the ed fund was created, the education fund was created for Act 60.
Okay.
And so that they came in with they call them splinter taxes. Now,
Yes.
there was current use, or not current use, sales and use, the sales tax, purchase and use,
Right, right, okay.
all those things back. And it's changed over time, but those came in to help too. Also the lottery.
The lottery was actually dedicated to the education
Yeah.
fund to,
Yeah.
so there have been general fund general
Others-
fund transfer, that's
yeah.
right, it was general fund transfer, so it sort of established the ed fund, the dynamic change, but it gives you a sense of what the changes were and how to phase it, and I think you do have to, I think it's an art a little bit, because it depends on how big the changes are, and is it the right amount for the right amount of time, and if it's, it's $1, that's a very big change. If it's 3 cents, it's a very different size scale. So that, I think that's part of the art of figuring out the transition. And one last thing on I would just say the transition is tough because you're in a session, you talk about the lag time and people are doing the budgets. So there's actually a 1 year, this thing called the thermostat for 1 year. Because you were in, the legislature was meeting for transitioning. So there was actually a slightly different formula for a year before it went to the Act 60 formula because of that lag in legislative process and school budgeting. So when you get down to the actual details of the transition, that funny lag, you have to think through that.
And if we move, we haven't had a chance, this works very well. We haven't had a chance yet, though yesterday, Deb said that her and Nicole are, shouldn't say looking forward to, but planning on modeling out the income, what it looks like to weave in income to this whole models we're looking at. We haven't had a chance to do that yet. And so that also means that the impacts of the changes are gonna hit differently and have slightly different shapes as we look across them. And so transition planning is different for that. And there's, yeah. And so I think what I'm trying to come out of this conversation with today is for us to name what those bumpers or guardrails or whatever words you were using. Throttles, what feels reasonable to us to be putting in the report as sort of what a roll-in would look like. Because of course it would be with cost equity or weighting, it would be a slightly different thing that's rolled in, but the scale of the impact is what we're mitigating, right? And that's what I think it's important for us to be naming explicitly.
It's based on, how Act 46 went and all the jump through once we put that 5% thing in there. I really think that you want is a rolling average of the tax rate. Because that way a district, if they decide to do something crazy and spend through the moon for some reason, they're not protected. They're going to have to live with that decision for 5 years. That's the way. So yeah, I thought we should have done it in Act 46. We went a different direction, but I think that's the way we should do it.
And again, as I said, there was, Jim looked it up, I want to say it was Act 48 of 2018, maybe. I need to go back.
Yeah, we had to go back in there.
There was
crack it open.
that was put in there to kind of stop that idea, right?
There was a lot of concern that districts were just gonna oh boy, 5%, let's roll out our one-time expenses and let's do them right now. There was a lot of concern.
I don't know if districts have the bandwidth to do that right now, but I totally hear you.
They're pretty savvy.
Yeah.
They know what's going on.
Just to follow, I'm a little confused. Part of what we're trying to do, you're on a cost equity. You're not talking cost.
I don't think it matters.
Yeah, I think almost all the conversations are the same.
Yeah, all right, well, so then,
Yeah.
isn't what we're trying to do is encourage some districts to spend more than they normally would anyway in order to provide the services to the students who they say they can't afford to provide the services for now.
Yeah. Right. I don't think averaging their rate over 5 years changes that calculation.
Can you just elaborate on walk me through how that would work? So how does
Well,
that work?
so you would just, when they do people that have the really big computers, they just say, okay, their tax rate this year is $1.70, but this is what it was the other 4 years. So their average, this is, and it all comes out in the yield. It's where it all comes out.
Right, and I keep thinking this in the back of my head, I agree with you, it all comes out in yield, but if you're talking about averaging tax rates using the tax rate that you're talking about coming into for the coming year, that's part of the yield calculus, so it becomes very iterative at that point.
It does, yeah, it
Yeah.
does. Yeah.
And which I think is why, from one perspective, averaging equalized pupils is a little bit more straightforward in that it doesn't become an iterative process with the yield.
If you're doing weighting.
Right.
Of course, you have all the other problems with weighting.
Right.
Weighting too, the equalization ratio, equity, yeah, all those other things.
And one thing I was struck with your explanation of Act 46 was how incredibly complicated it would be for anyone to actually try to figure out what their own tax rate is or to understand their own tax rate. And I think, have some hope that we're going to simplify on the other end of this.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to what Representative Beck said. I would prefer that we do it on the equalized pupils for one reason that Brad just mentioned, because equalized pupils come into the whole formula earlier than tax rates do. They're the basis on what tax rates are used to calculate. But also what we're doing if we're changing the weights is changing equalized pupils. And so then it's really clear that we are changing equalized pupils and we're going to roll in the equalized pupils for districts going up and going down. So there's not a shock either way. And it's more logical. I also, and Emily and I have had, or Representative Kornheiser and I have had these conversations constantly because she's a tax person. So she thinks about all this based on tax rates and how the impact on taxes. And I'm a school budget person. And so I think about it on the impact of school budgets. So I really want to, for me, it's important that we keep the focus on what's happening at the school level, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to improve the resources available to teach kids in our schools. And so if we're talking about equalized pupils, then that's what we're focusing on rather than tax rates. Tax rates are the end result for the community, but they are not the thing that we're trying to really get at here. What we're trying to get at is resources for educating kids. And so that's what I prefer. And if we do the weighting formula with the updated weights from the 1028 memo, then that would be, we could roll in equalized pupils. If we go with the cost equity with whatever amounts we do, then we could do 20% a year of the grant. So they, get those, or of the cost equity formula portion, they get 20% and roll it in that way. The one other thing I just want to add is that we had a conversation a few weeks ago. I remember because we were in room 10. So I have this visual of us having this conversation about the spending threshold, which is another thing. And I think we all agreed that during whatever transition period we come up with, whether it's 5 years or what, that we would continue the suspension on the threshold, but then implement a threshold at the end of that, but name what it's going to be now so school districts can plan for it. That's my recollection of the decision we made at that point. So that would be part of this whole thing.
I want to sort of say this again, and I don't mean to be redundant. I just, when I think about the 5% threshold, I am not thinking about it as an actual tool that we would put in legislation. I'm talking about it as a way of understanding how many years we want to stretch a transition out for as we're designing a system. I think the different policy tools we would put in place to implement the changes are different based on what model we would use and have sort of ethical and policy considerations attached to them. But in terms of communities' capacity to handle a transition, tax rates make sense to me as a way for us to have a guardrails for how we sort of design the length of the implementation. Because I think the 5 years is something that we sort of came up out of the blue but we hadn't looked for what it would actually mean for communities to be spread across, to have that transition spread across 5 years. Other thoughts, questions? I'm feeling a little circling and trying to find my way towards bringing us.
We do need to make a decision today on this, guys.
Yeah. But we don't have language in front of us. Senator Hooker, do you have any questions? I don't do as good a job at glancing up at you as I could. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Now I'm just trying to absorb what we're trying to do here. And I think that, we need to obviously have some kind of guardrails in place, just as long as districts are aware that they're not surprised, that they don't feel shocked. This is a thing that, I think we have to do. And if there's a way of simplifying this, please make it fun.
Agreed. Is the next step to try to write up what it's, I don't feel capable of verbally summarizing what I think people are leaning towards today. Is anyone interested in verbally summarizing their own thoughts? Is it helpful to have something written down and floated around as part of the draft report and people can comment on that? Does anyone have any strong desires?
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
Me either.
If somebody has a proposal, that would be helpful.
Okay, great.
Verbally or written down, just,
Okay.
this is the way I think we should do it.
Mhm.
I think that would be a good way to
Okay.
help us move to a decision.
And I think for me, I'm stuck circling my own decision making because I need to see the percentage changes for myself mapped out before I can feel like I have a plan. Did you have a?
Oh, I was gonna say, this would be a great time to have a big whiteboard where we can sort of put the topics down, and it
Yes.
doesn't quite lend itself to that kind of deliberation.
No, we could take down all the portraits and put up whiteboards.
Oh, that'd be
Post-it
awesome. Let's do
notes.
that.
Okay.
And I mean, Earl, I don't want to give a cold work, but before, I think he said
Mhm.
doing the percentages would be pretty quick. Maybe we would even have those after lunch. He's over there working on them now. I don't know.
Yeah, let's see if we can look at those this afternoon, maybe. We'll put a placeholder in that. Okay.
The percentage change per district, yeah.
We have it in spending for the
Right.
weights.
Mhm.
Right.
Okay, so let's see if we can continue this conversation this afternoon. We have, were you about to say something?
I was, it was just that for me, seeing how much spending would be impacted when I don't know the total budget, like what percentage of, it's hard, tax rates are much more impactful for me to see.
Okay.
Because that is the actual, how much your tax rate is going to go up or down. If, I see Champlain's number and I freak, but I don't know what their total budget is.
Mhm.
And then I saw their tax rate change and I thought, okay, maybe that's not as bad as I thought.
Mhm.
So anyway, it's helpful.
That's why I love the percentage changes.
Yeah,
Percentage of tax rate would be the best.
Okay.
yeah, the gross numbers are less helpful for me because I have no idea what slice of the pie that is.
We have a percentage change on the spending.
Right.
That
Yes.
is one of them, yeah.
Yep. And I think for tax rates.
Okay, we're gonna take another break. We have public comment is at 12 today, just to really spice up our lives. I moved it to a different spot on the agenda. And so that folks who would have an easier time doing that during their lunch break rather than in this random middle of the afternoon are able to participate, not actually spice up our lives. And so we're gonna take a quick break to stretch, and then we're gonna have public comment, and then we'll have lunch, and then we'll come back and we'll talk more, and that will be fabulous.